Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Energy Blueprint podcast. I'm your host, Ari Whitten, and today I have with me my good friend, Razi Berry, who wins the award for the most awesome name in the history of mankind, in my personal opinion. She's the founder and publisher of the award-winning journal Naturopathic Doctor News and Review, the International Journal of Naturopathic Medicine, and the authoritative naturopathic medical resource for patients, naturalpath.net. She's the host of the successful consumer health events, the Natural Cancer Prevention Summit, the Heart Revolution, and the Sugar-Free Summer Detox Program. She's also co-owned a successful naturopathic practice for 14 years, and in 2017, she was awarded the prestigious title of Champion of Naturopathic Medicine by the American Association of Naturopathic Physicians. And perhaps most importantly for our discussion that we're going to have in this podcast, she's the creator of the upcoming docuseries, Love is Medicine. So welcome, my friend. How are you?
It's great to see you. I haven't seen you since you filmed your segment for the Love is Medicine project. So that's going to be wonderful. And I really appreciate you inviting me on again. I love the Energy Blueprint, love your work. I'm in your private group, and I really appreciate everything you're bringing to consumers and other practitioners. So thank you.
Thank you so much. The feeling's so mutual. I'm really excited about your upcoming docuseries. So, Love is Medicine, which is a sort of, I think on first blush, it sounds like kind of a hokey, new agey sort of title. So, and yet you're actually going and interviewing a bunch of like science experts and talking details of science. So it's not just new age, like spiritual fluff or something that someone might assume based on the title, but
Right.
we're really geeking out on the science around health and especially aspects related to love. Well, lots of different facets and interpretations of that word. So I would like you to explain what Love is Medicine is all about.
Yes. So as you mentioned, I've been publishing a naturopathic journal for almost 15 years now. We just entered our 15th year. And I also have been in the process of getting indexed a peer-reviewed journal that I've had for some time. But the process of getting indexed into PubMed and stuff, there's some work behind that. So we're almost ready to accept submissions for that. So over these last, decade and a half of reading all these studies, I've noticed patterns that, we have now science to explain a lot of these patterns, and yet a lot of them are just kind of left to the empirical experience between like doctor and patient or client and practitioner. And the pattern is this, and this is going to sound like not rocket science, but we can get into some of the science, is really where a lot of the disease comes from, I noticed, was some type of disconnection from what I say are sources of love. And love is very subjective. It's something as humans we all experience. We all say we've experienced love. We've all felt love. We've seen people in action with love, and yet science can't really quantify it. But it's felt just as if like I were to say the words, Ari, come here. My intention behind those words, you can feel physiologically. Like if somebody were to say, Ari, come here, or Ari, come here, there's many, many different ways that we can say that. Yeah. And you as the receiver will have a physiological reaction that doesn't rest just in your brain, but in the body that houses your brain, that your brain is connected to these different nervous systems, right? It's not really a nervous system. Like the science of embodied cognition is kind of now saying we have nervous systems in our body. Well, the areas of disconnection that I have found are either disconnection from the self, which is, like for instance, many years ago, I had an eating disorder. You can't be self-connected to your body's own physiological needs or its metabolic processes when you aren't nourishing yourself, or when you're eating your way into diabetes, for instance, or obesity or heart disease. You can't be connected to yourself if you are traumatizing a child into a future autoimmune disease. So these are things that we subjectively experience but yet they do have physical outcomes, physiological outcomes. So there's the disconnection from the self, there's disconnection from each other, which is a really hot topic now with regard to, social connectedness, social isolation, social awareness. And in fact, the science is really showing that you can really only be self-aware in a context, in really a social context. So in context with the people that you interact with. And we can talk about some of that science in a second. And the other is the disconnection from nature. You touch on a lot of these in Energy Blueprint, with just things like being connected to the earth, being connected to the diurnal rhythms of the day, how our hormones follow those, how growth cycles follow those, things like temperature. We are meant, and I think we've talked about this before, to be in a variety and somewhat extremity of temperatures throughout even the day, no matter where you live, right? So even if you live in a very cold climate, there's still going to be a span of change in temperature throughout the day. And our body's rhythms, our cell clocks, because every cell has a clock, follows these. So when I say love, I do mean things like relationships, like with your parents, with your children, with friends, in romantic relationships. And we have the science that says these do impact our physiology. Also self-love, how we connect to ourselves, how we pay attention to our body cues, how we're honest to ourselves about how we, the decisions that we make that no one else can make for us, that that lead us towards health or towards disease. But you can teach people all day the wonders that you've discovered for Energy Blueprint, but you can't make a person make that change. That only comes down to the self. And that's kind of what I mean by love with that respect.
Yeah, that was beautifully said. You asked me when we were filming for the documentary, my segment. Well, actually, I want to give a little funny backstory, but I realized like the day before, or 2 days before, I saw it on my calendar that we had scheduled the filming for it, and I saw the title of the project was Love is Medicine, and I actually reached out to you, like panicked, basically said, I'm not sure I feel confident to do this interview because I'm not an expert on love. And I don't know that I don't want to just make stuff up. I mean, I could speak to certain aspects that relate to it, but I'm far from an expert in love or relationships or something like that. And so I basically called you trying to cancel. And you reassured me that, it's not like love purely in that sense, but also self-care as an aspect of love. And so what are the different aspects of self-care and understanding the science around how do we really learn the strategies that ultimately control our health, destiny, and impact our energy levels and quality of life. And you asked me as we were filming at the end of it to define my, how I perceive love as medicine. What does it mean to me? So I would like to ask you that same question. Given that you've now done probably, 50 interviews or more with all kinds of different health experts for this Love is Medicine project, and heard lots of other people's perspectives, and you're also taking obviously your own into it as well. Well, I have two questions. So how did you define love as medicine originally, and has it shifted at all through this process?
Well, that's a really good question, Ari. So I guess it has, but I think it's just grown deeper, kind of like when you have an instinct about what someone in your Energy Blueprint needs to do, because it's like maybe a practice you do or a pattern you've seen in your clients. And then you dig into the science or explore other experts and you find more and more evidence for it to be true, that's kind of what my experience has been. So, I am a little bit woo-woo. I do try to back everything up with science, but what we do know is that...
Just to be clear, sorry to interrupt you, but just to be clear, I like a little bit of woo-woo. To be a little bit cutting edge, you have to be a little bit ahead of whatever the current state of the evidence is, and sort of by definition, that tends to be a little woo-woo. So little is good paired with good scientific literacy, which you have, so...
Well, there's woo all around science, and I'm going to answer that question. But for instance, like we're still learning more about like the genome and DNA, and we thought we figured that out, and then we're realizing that it's how the DNA is folded inside a cell. So it's almost like the cell is reading, the cell is like aware of the DNA, and can read based on how it's folded into each other, kind of like you take a post-it note, right? Or we've all seen those magazines where you can like fold something and you read it a certain way, but if you spread it out, it just looks like gibberish. That's an amazing way that our cells are aware. And the definition of consciousness for many scientists is if something can perceive and interact with its environment. So love to me is kind of like that. So at the micro level, we have cells responding to our environment, and then we have our organ system, tissues responding to the environment, and we've got our organs responding to the environment, and then we as individuals respond to our environment. And love to me are the source. Love is undefinable. Some people call it God, life. No matter how much we study the Big Bang or a cell or a DNA or an electron or a boson, we never can get to the very bottom of what that is. And we can't even really figure out if it's a particle or a wave, right? It's like, that's even up for debate. But what we do is we see life expressing itself through a fruiting tree, through the sunlight, through the organisms pretty much everywhere in the soil and our bodies everywhere. And that life expression is giving, and some people call it God, life, and I call it love. And a lot of scientists are starting to do that as well. The sources of love are our social connections, our families, which are so interesting because there's so many places in nature, even like a solar system, where there's groups of entities or groups of cells that really need each other to work together in a state of health. So I love looking at these kind of micro and macro examples. Then, how we move through the world, we can choose to move through the world in love, meaning in a way that's giving, health promoting, life promoting, and sustaining to each other, to our planet. And to me, that is what love is. And to get in alignment with those, again, many of the things that you teach in your programs is love to me. So that's kind of a little bit woo-woo, but
yeah, I love it.
That's what it is.
I love it. I love your definition of love.
And I remember when you asked me that, and I could tell that you were trying to get out of it, and I understand.
Yeah, I remember you being really annoyed. You're like, Ari, we talked about this like 2 months ago when I originally asked you, and I told you it wasn't about love in that way. I was like, crap, I'm sorry.
I would say, love is expressed in different forms, and based on the work you do, I would say you're very much an expert in love and teaching people how to treat their bodies with love. I mean, that's a very high expression of love.
Do I have your permission to add that to my official bio?
Yes.
So I can call myself an expert in love?
Yeah, you have my permission. So important.
So you talk a lot about in your work, and we talked about this in the previous podcast we did, self-awareness. Yeah. So in the process of healing, when we're talking about people with health struggles who maybe they're suffering depression or chronic anxiety or chronic pain or autoimmune disease or something, where does self-awareness fit into this process, and how does self-awareness tie in with the concept of love as medicine?
Yeah, thank you. So self-awareness, as we said before, is kind of an understanding or perception of where you, an individual, lives, is positioned in the greater sphere of life, right? So whether it's just, who am I in relation to this conversation we're having? Who am I in relation to my kids who are supposed to be doing their homework in the other room? Who am I in relation to this day? And again, the field of embodied cognition shows that really we used to think of cognition as something kind of separate that only happened in the brain, but really it can only happen in a context. And we need things to experience in order to think, to consider, to experience cognition. And self-awareness is at the very key of that, because our self-awareness dictates our social behavior, whether it's pro-social or in isolation. It dictates every decision that we make from the minute we wake up consciously in the morning to when we go to bed at night. So science is starting to show that self-awareness and lack of self-awareness, which is sometimes, self-awareness is sometimes called interoception. That's just one part of it. That's like sensing your body, is really key to many, many diseases. And we see that, of course, spectrum disorders and stuff, and even personality disorders tend to have a less socially aware personality. And also, when we are more self-aware, we tend to make decisions that are more respective of the people around us. They're more pro-social. So they, like, for instance, this is a silly example, but when you're putting your groceries away in your car, people are more likely to put the cart back in where it's supposed to be if they think people are watching than if they don't. That awareness happens when you believe that you're being observed. And this has been studied too. They've done studies with people who walk by and are wearing like opaque sunglasses or clear glasses. And through skin conductance testing, they've shown that people become more aware of their body, their heart rate variability, and things like that when they're being watched. So self-awareness does a couple things. So it helps us with those decisions that we make every day. And it also helps us listen to our symptoms, like our body's messages, really. So whether it's a pain or an itch or a feeling of hunger, or really any symptom that you can imagine, there's a lot of instances where, let's say somebody has heart disease and they wonder, how did I get here? Many, many times in cases I've published over and over again, the clinician, the physician turns it back on the patient. How did you get here? And mostly we know. But what we do is we move through this world without this sense of self-awareness. We kind of are disembodied. We live just in our brains. And because of that, I feel like we've kind of lost our way.
Yeah, beautifully said. I want to talk a bit more about this self-awareness in context concept.
Yeah.
I read, this maybe 5 or 6 years ago at this point, but I remember reading a study where they were talking about, I forget, they called this particular term, it was like hierarchical anxiety or status. I think it was like status anxiety. That might be correct. And there's somebody who's like an anthropologist who's written extensively on this topic. But basically, the gist of it is that when we are removed from our historical context of existing in a small tribe or a village, a community of people who we generally know who they are, we share a value system, we share a similar culture or the same culture, and we know our role in that society. Now, in the modern world, we've been removed from all of those elements. So we no longer have a tribe. We no longer exist around most of the time, most of us exist surrounded by people that we don't know. I mean, even if we live in an apartment building where there's 100 people living right next door to us, we often don't even know the people who live right next door to us, let alone spend significant time with them. We don't share a similar culture. We don't have community gatherings. We don't all have this shared joint purpose and sort of mission, community that we're all working and that we all fit into as a hub of that wheel where we know our place. So all of those things have been dissolved now. And now when we, for example, meet somebody and we shake their hands, it's like we have all these things in the back of our mind, mostly below the level of consciousness, but it's like, are you higher status than me? Are you more educated than I am? Are you smarter than I am? Are you more financially successful than I am? Are you like, do you look down on me? And And like, we have all these layers of of thought and self-criticism and self-talk that are happening beneath the surface of every little interaction as we go about our day and encounter other people. worrying about people judging us and so on. That stuff largely didn't exist in a context where we're one of this hub of the community. We have this shared mission. We know our place in society. Everybody else knows our place in society and knows who we are. And I'm just, that's kind of what came to my mind as you were talking about this self-awareness in context. And I'm just curious if that sort of brings up anything for you.
I love this point you're bringing up. And I'll admit I haven't really spent a lot of time on that aspect of it. But I find it fascinating because we have kind of dissolved culture. And in some ways, it's even become vilified to be like proud of your culture, because in our society, it's somehow thought to be like, well, if you're proud of your culture, then you're racist against other cultures. And it's something that I find to be so ridiculous, because when we do look at, you know, I don't want to be another person talking about blue zones, but when you see about like in Rosetta, for instance, like people had their culture, and that was a sense of similarity and safety and belonging. And it just made me think of when we are in a lab, we put the cell in a culture, and the culture changes the cell, you know, that's epigenetic. But even when you look at the human body, there are, you know, organs are made of cells that are similar to each other. In a way, that's a tribe. I mean, it might sound silly that I'm making these macro and micro inferences, but I think there are patterns all throughout nature. And I'm really fascinated by what you're saying, because it's true. There's this kind of, we used to only have threats just right outside of the tribe, but there was this sense of connection. There was like this congruence of all the members of that tribe, where like all the cells in an organ, or all the organs in an organ system. And together you could kind of face that. And now we're kind of just going it alone. We are kind of, it's not okay to be part of a culture. It's not okay to be part of a specific gender. Like, you have to be careful about everything you say. And then there's this whole, I feel like that because we've become so separated, exactly like what you're saying, there's this whole new construct of people wanting to be seen in these artificial and electronic ways that the research is showing just leads to depression, bullying, suicide. So I hope I'm not going on a tangent of that.
No, actually explain that last point. Elaborate on that. What do you mean by to be seen in?
Yeah, so we were all important members of a tribe, which is an extended family, just the way an organ, the cells of an organ are extended family, and everything works together and kind of knows its place. And there's some hierarchy, like maybe the elders or something like that, but generally everybody had a place and they mattered. And a lot of what you're saying now, I'm kind of going off on like an idea, but I also see with regard to social media and stuff, we are so disconnected. And I mean, everyone says that, but you're saying it in a really different way that I appreciate, because now everybody wants to be an influencer, and the selfie culture. And I think we're so hungry to belong to a group that now we're doing in these sort of maladaptive ways that it's falling flat, and it's not connecting us in the way that we did. And I think we know that our experiences are passed on our DNA, right? Like the famous study where rats were taught to be afraid of the smell of fruit because they were shocked every time. And then those pups on and on and on were afraid of the smell of fruit because they thought they were going to get shocked. I think what's happened is we got used to, for so many generations, of having these deep, meaningful sense of belonging. And you didn't have to be like the leader to have a sense of belonging. Every person in the tribe mattered, whether it's the person like grinding a grain or descaling fish or taking care of the babies, right? Like every point mattered. And I think we've lost that. And I think people, especially our youth, are just fighting for that now.
Yeah. I think the political landscape is an interesting example of this, like how fractured that and polarized that whole landscape has become. I mean, I would say I'm pretty politically moderate, very middle of the spectrum. And, it's funny, most of my friends that are right-leaning, listen, when I engage with them in political discussion, they'll think of me as like a hardcore lefty. And then I have people who are hardcore left friends who think I'm like super extreme right. And it's funny for me to engage in both of these conversations, because I think a lot of people aren't. A lot of people who are on either side of the political spectrum are existing in their own little echo chambers. where they only have conversations with people who like think similarly to them. And so their perception of reality gets skewed, and their perception of the whole political spectrum gets skewed in such a way that they become more extreme while simultaneously thinking of themselves as very middle ground. And then anybody who's actually like middle ground is perceived as extreme. So it's interesting. And there's actual data. I've looked at the data around over the last 15 years, both the right and the left have moved more towards the extreme views. So there used to be a lot more overlap of the two groups in the middle. There used to be a lot more political moderates. And now there's way fewer political moderates because everybody's moving towards the extremes on both sides.
Yeah, and I think you're just really answering the question that you asked me also, because look at how we don't belong to these core groups that were part of our existence. You know, it was part of whether we were going to live or die, and how we raised our children and how we learned. And now we are so hungry for that we're just, without even thinking, we're just grabbing on to a belief system that we aren't even fully very aware of what is in that system, and just clinging on to that. I see it happening in all sorts of things. Certain diets, people get like die hard, clinging to something like that. Your political observation, I think, is a fantastic example of that. And I think that it just goes to show how much people just want to be connected. I mean, look at how people, they go off to college and suddenly, like on Friday night, you know, they're painting their face the colors like of a tribe and rooting for a team, which is like a simulation of a war.
Yeah, absolutely. And then, you know, there's other aspects of this, like young boys who feel not part of a community, don't feel any sort of purpose or meaning. Then things can get funneled in a bad direction, like they join a gang or, you know, get addicted to drugs or something as a way to escape the void that they feel. So, there's lots of maladaptive aspects of this. Getting back to kind of self-awareness in the context of health. What kinds of practices do you think are useful for people to engage in on that front to become more self-aware, to improve not only their health, but their quality of life as well?
So the research is kind of ongoing, but there are a few different practices that I've studied that can really help. And this is not just in a subjective sense, but it's through fMRI studies, skin conductance tests, and measuring heart rate variability, and so on. So one of the practices that's been pretty well studied is called mindful body awareness therapy. And basically what it is feeling through a place of discomfort with a therapist in this particular case, but people can learn how to do it at home. And it's really, it's putting like your hands, like wherever that feeling of discomfort is. So it can be a physical discomfort, like an irritable bowel or angina or, arthritic pain, and really being aware of that pain, not just in your mind, but in your body, and breathing through it, kind of asking yourself questions like, what does this mean to me? What is my part in this? What can I do to alleviate this? And it also works the other way with regard to emotional distress. So if you're going through a time of grief or great stress, the therapist will help you. Where are you feeling that in your body? Where is your body tightening up? And so it's a way to just kind of link together what you're feeling in your mind, your body, and oftentimes putting language to it. And so the studies are showing that does help people become more aware. And this is being used for people with all sorts of disorders, like eating disorders, which is really well studied area of people just not really being quite in tune, obviously, with their body. Another practice, I was so amazed that this is actually something studied, because it sounds just so basic, but I think it's important. It's something that I've put into practice over the last few years, is just body scanning. And what that means is, we're all familiar with the type of relaxation where you go through your toes and all the way up your body and like clench and relax. So this is kind of like that. But what you do is you just kind of scan, like, what is your body feeling like? through every moment. Like I recently fractured my tailbone. That's why I couldn't be at Mindshare.
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
I
So
heard that, and I'm sorry, I've totally spaced on it.
oh no,
How are you doing, by the way?
I'm doing really good. I'm healing up really well. And the interesting thing is that it being engaged in this conversation with you, I'm sitting on this funny kind of donut like pillow thing right now. And
So
I was
people think
not
you have hemorrhoids.
that's what people will think I know when I take it. Um but what I just totally lost because I was like
Your tailbone is healing nicely.
yeah, I mean and so even though it is uncomfortable, like I'm not in pain, but it's less comfortable than before it happened. Through our conversation, I was not really aware. My awareness wasn't there. And so when I started just talking to you about body scanning and I start kind of subconsciously or I guess consciously scanning through my body, I suddenly was made more aware of that discomfort. Not in a bad way, but what it does is it allows you to attend to what your body needs. Have you ever had a day where you're like so busy doing podcasts that you realize, and not because you're intermittent fasting, but you realize, oh my God, I have not eaten since dinner last night, you know?
Yeah.
And I try not to do those things because I try to be self-aware, but that's just a kind of a silly example. But throughout the day, we have feelings of hunger, feelings of thirst, feeling of fatigue, of feeling too hot or feeling too cold. And when you scan your body for those messages, it teaches you to pay attention to those more subtle messages. And what the research shows is the more you're aware, the less likely you are to engage in risky health behavior. And that can be anything from like drinking too much coffee or smoking a cigarette or, eating foods you're allergic to or something like that. So body scan is pretty simple, but I think it's a really good thing for people to add into their daily practice. Just kind of scan, like, what am I feeling right now? Where am I feeling uncomfortable? And to adjust, and it starts to teach you.
What kinds of benefits do you think people will experience from incorporating practices like this?
Well, one of the things I experienced is when I started doing this a couple years ago, I realized like I would always have water with me, but I'd get so busy in what I was doing is I'd realize even though I had my water there, I wasn't really drinking my water. So when I started doing the body scan, I would realize I haven't been drinking enough water. And that might sound something simple, but remember the book, Your Body's Many Cries for Water, and how just hydration is one simple thing that's, many people probably end up at their GP's office with a mild complaint. Everything turns out fine, and maybe they're just not hydrated. So I know that sounds like a silly example, but it's those little steps. And then you start to, it builds and builds. So self-awareness kind of happens in these small steps. And then you start to realize like, oh, I've been sitting in this chair too long. I haven't been exercising enough. Oh, I signed up for a gym on New Year's Eve and or New Year's, and I haven't been going. And it's just kind of like the trickle down effect of that. And another really fun practice that has been studied that increases the interoceptive sensitivity, this ability to really hone in on like what your body needs at any given time or what's happening, is power posing. And there was actually a few studies on this that showed most of the studies have been done on women, which I find very interesting, but it showed when women did just a few minutes a day of power posing, that they were really more tuned in to bodily self-awareness and their interoceptive sensitivity. And power posing is something as simple as like putting your feet up on your desk and putting your hands behind, and just kind of this feeling of like self-confidence. Another one is like standing up and putting like your hands, on your hips, and you're really with your hips width apart, and just a statement of like, I'm good, I'm here, I'm powerful, I'm in charge of my day. And those power, and you can make up your own too, whatever feels good. I do it with my daughter sometimes, and one of my daughters, she like had to do like a superhero, like a Wonder Woman, fist with her hand on her hip. And so as silly as it sounds, like I don't power pose in front of other people, and that's my daughters, but sometimes like if I have to make a decision, I'll do a little power posing, and just kind of as a way to just move and get more in tune. And again, it's what's so beautiful about it is they're simple. and they're easy. And when you become self-aware, then you do better in, following your energy blueprint, segment that you're working on right now, or taking the supplement every day that's been recommended to you, or staying on your exercise program. And they're just these little steps to help you. A couple other things I want to mention, Ari, that can improve self-awareness really have to do with our relationships with each other. And one of them is hearing someone else say your name. It is really been shown to be a powerful way for people to bring their awareness back into themselves. And it's babies at about, well, you have a new baby, congratulations.
Thank you.
And at about 4 months of age, babies start preferring to hear their own name over anyone else's. I remember reading the study. I don't remember how they conducted the study, so how do they know that the baby likes it better? But it was a published study. And so I try to be mindful when I'm speaking with people now to use their name. And when they do, they often kind of mirror that. We've got these mirror neurons and we kind of mimic each other. And it's also important because when you have really connected friendships and relationships, you're more likely to call somebody by their name, and they're more likely to call you by their name. Direct eye gaze, someone looking into your eye, or even just a study if you think somebody could, like they walk by with opaque glasses on versus more clear glasses, really induces bodily self-awareness. And of course, touch really increases self-awareness. So other reasons aside from just the oxytocin needs for connecting with others, it helps us, being with others helps us know ourselves better.
Yeah, fascinating. So one other aspect that I know you've dug into a lot, and I'm sure you've talked about a lot in Love is Medicine, is mindset around healing. So if somebody is having health struggles or has a disease, what kind of mindset do they have? How optimistic are they? How positive and hopeful are they, for recovery?
Yeah.
There's a lot of anecdotes that I've read about this, but I really haven't explored much of the literature around this at all. So I'm curious to hear what your take on sort of the role of positivity and hope is in the context of healing.
Yeah, so hope is, I was really delighted when I saw that hope is kind of studied in its own right. Outside of just positivity, hope is kind of a belief and desire for a specific outcome, and it's a real driver for people to be active. People can be positive and kind of let things happen with a positive attitude, but when you have hope, at least the way some of the literature I've read has shown, hope inspires you towards action. So think about, like I remember you talking to me about your wife. She used to suffer from migraines, I believe. Is that right? Yes. And you said she suffered from migraines and she didn't really have any help. And then she met you. And so you have, a close bond relationship, and she saw you as an expert that you are. And so that relationship invokes a sense of hope in her. And when you instill a sense of hope in someone, what the literature is showing, and many of these are reviews, is that it inspires somebody towards action. So it increases compliance. And in our modern medical system, doctors are often fearful of hope, right? They're worried about false hope. They're worried about letting somebody down. They're worried about getting sued. I understand all these things. But what I read, and I'm not conducting any of this research, but the research I read is that hope is very, very powerful in having people move in ways that are going to benefit. And then my own personal feeling is, like, if you're going to suffer, why not suffer with a state of hope instead of, a state of this despair? I mean, we are all mortal. And so why not live in hope? Why not live in the beauty of each moment and hope for something better? Mm-hmm. Now, I'm not an expert on hope, and somebody could definitely have other ideas about why false hope might be something and not to do. So part of this is coming from this research, and some of it's just coming from my own belief system. But hope has shown to be a real driver of healing.
It just makes very intuitive sense that if somebody's hopeful for their recovery, they're going to be more likely to take actions that would facilitate it. Whereas if somebody's lost all hope, they're going to be like, well, screw it, I'm going to die anyway, or I'm never going to get better, so why bother? And I've experienced people like that. I've experienced people who, they're interested in, for example, buying the Energy Blueprint program, and I'll get emails from them saying, I'm interested, but, I've had chronic fatigue for 20 years and I've had this symptom and that symptom, and I've been to 20 different doctors and nothing's helped thus far. So I'm kind of at the point where I'm like, well, why should I even bother trying anything else? Nothing can work for me. Nobody knows how to fix me. And, I certainly empathize with the frustration of someone in that scenario, but of course, like if you stop trying, there's no possibility of getting better. So the only reasonable approach in that scenario is to be still hopeful for recovery and actively looking for new strategies and new knowledge to facilitate that recovery, and to be applying them with the intention and with the hope and confidence in the possibility of, if not recovering fully, at least recovering to a very large degree, which I think is possible for almost everybody, all but maybe the most severe cases of dysfunction that's many, many, many decades long. I mean, for example, if somebody's got Parkinson's disease and they've lost 80% of the neurons that produce dopamine, I mean, it's not realistic to say, hey, you can be hopeful for a full recovery. I mean, we have to be realistic about the actual physical destruction of the cells that has taken place over the course of many decades, and the fact that it's not likely you're going to rebuild a whole lot of them. But assuming that you catch stuff early on, relatively speaking, but prior to the onset of decades-long severe dysfunction and actual structural changes in your body's cells and organ systems, I think it's very reasonable to assume that in the vast majority of cases, at least stopping the progression, if not reversing it, is very possible.
And I think that you make such an important point that I'd like to highlight, is that it's also hope as like trait-based hope, like hope that comes from within. So yeah, if you had a patient that had, late Parkinson's disease, I don't know if that's the right way to call it, you would need to be careful about saying, yeah, I can totally help you with this. But if a person currently is struggling and they want to live the rest of their life with hope, I would say good for them, and let them live out their days like that. If they want to keep fighting, we all are going to die one day. And I think that's the kind of hope that's most important. It's not so much our responsibility as coaches or clinicians or as doctors to give that hope, although I think it's also not the job of the doctor to take away hope. And I'm speaking very much from a place of opinion on this. But if somebody has that hope and fire for life till the very end, I think that's really a gift.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well said. So talk to me about placebo and nocebo science. I'm sure you've dug into this very extensively for your documentary. And
and here's the thing. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Yeah, sorry. I was just gonna say I've developed an interest in placebo and nocebo science many years ago, and so I dug a lot into the literature, but I haven't looked at it much as far as what's come out in the last few years on this topic. So I'm curious what you found.
Yes, and so I have like good news and bad news. So the good news is their placebo and nocebo are real. The literature shows that placebo does affect physiological outcomes in the body, as does nocebo, meaning a negative belief in an outcome, or a positive, which is nocebo, and a positive belief in an outcome. The bad news is once you read all of the study and how it's situated, you get to the bottom, nobody knows how it happens. Like that is what I have found from everything that I've read, is like it will be a big fancy design in the middle of the paper, and at the very end, nobody really knows. And I think sometimes that's good. I think that keeps us humble and helps us understand that we can't always conquer nature. We can't always conquer life. And it comes back to this kind of beautiful mystery that life and love is. And I think there are probably must be a reason why we don't have the answer for everything. I don't know what that reason is, but we don't. There must be a reason. So I wanted to talk with you about nocebo and placebo, just because the importance, again, with mindset, with belief system, with how we talk to each other, with how we treat our clients, is that it is very real. It does affect, it really does affect things. And even there's researchers at MIT that are studying this with very intricate design studies, and yet nobody knows exactly what the mechanism is.
Mm-hmm.
Isn't that wild?
Any theories around what the mechanisms could be? And I would imagine to some extent it might tie into the hope concept.
Yeah, I mean, the studies that I've been reading, and there are numerous of them, there's always kind of like at the end, kind of like a discussion, like this means that we should look further into like affect and how, like psychological states and how that might like be part of inflammation responses or immune system responses, but it's all just speculative. It really is all just speculative, and that's really interesting to me.
Yeah. There's some people who I think don't understand the placebo effect and the nocebo effect correctly, in the sense that a lot of people are used to thinking of it as a placebo is a substance like a sugar pill that a person might think. The placebo effect is like a person thinks that there's some effect taking place, even though there actually isn't an effect taking place.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's common thinking around what it is, whereas actually the placebo effect is you take a genuinely inert substance, but because you believe that it's having this effect, it actually does genuinely have a measurable effect in that direction.
Yeah.
And
Yes,
so
thank you for clarifying that. Yeah. Yeah, that's to me what's so amazing about it, because I mean, like a majority of studies have placebo as a control, and you're absolutely right. It's not just like I'm believing something; it's they're testing for a physiological response, a physiological outcome, a change in tissue, a change in oxygen levels in the brain on an fMRI scan, like, because that's all an fMRI really measures, right? We think we know so much about the brain because we can like do these scans, but really all we're really measuring when you really get down to it is kind of like where the blood's flowing, changes in oxygen levels, which means there's so much about the brain and nerve conduction and our that we just don't know yet. There'll probably be amazing things one day. We'll be able to figure that out, but it is so powerful that it's not just somebody believes they're going to heal. It's actually something measured in a lab that, these people all had clinical depression, and some took this drug and some took the placebo, and these were the outcomes, and they measure, biomarkers and things like that. So it is fascinating. It really is.
yeah, there's a video on YouTube. I'm forgetting the name of this offhand, but maybe I'll go search for it and put it on the show notes page to this podcast. But it's basically like a guy narrating this video, and then he says kind of an intro section, and then he gives like a warning and says you're about to hear an ultrasonic frequency that's outside of the range of normal human hearing that has really harmful effects on the body. And I just want to warn you, if you're uncomfortable, if you're in a situation like you're driving and you're in a dangerous situation where if you have some negative effects, you could crash and die or something, please don't listen any further. But if you're not in that situation, listen on. Okay, here we go. And this this ultrasonic frequency is now started, and then the guy's describing all the potential effects that this can cause. It can cause headaches. It can cause physical pains in your body, and it can cause nausea and dizziness and da 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 da. And so he's describing all these things, and this goes on for several minutes. And as this happens, there's a lot of people who will listen to this, and I've actually run this experiment with several people, including my private members group. And as people listen to this, there's a huge percentage of people who will report these various symptoms. They'll report they started getting a headache, or they started getting physical pains or a stomach ache or something like that. And then at the end of the video, the guy says, just kidding, there was nothing here that causes any physical problems. There was no sound. That was just silence, right? And the mere suggestion that something is harming you causes and there seems to be people who are more or less susceptible to this effect, but causes a large portion of people to all of the sudden start to generate some of these negative body sensations. I think the lesson for me that I take from a lot of the placebo and nocebo research is, like, be careful what you do with your mind. Be mindful of it. Excuse the pun, but knowing how powerful this is, we really have to be attentive to where we put our attention on and what kinds of expectations and intentions and hopes or lack of hope that we have in various contexts.
Mm-hmm. That's really good advice. I agree. And not just what we think, right, but what we surround ourselves with. Have you ever had this experience where someone cleans your house for you and you come home and you just have all this energy because your surroundings, or you come home and your house is like a disaster and there's dishes stacked in the kitchen, and it just, this isn't really a great example, but it's an example that a lot of people experience, and you just feel no energy. So our who we spend time with, back to that example I gave with, how I could say the words, Ari, come here, those are just words. It's just a vibration from my, throat to your inner ear. And yet, depending on my intention behind that, it can totally change your body chemistry.
Yeah. That's a great way of phrasing it. In those few seconds to utter those words with various kinds of emotional intent behind it, you can now change my body chemistry and change literally hormones. Like, you can invoke a startle reaction and cause the secretion of adrenaline and noradrenaline. Or on the other end of the spectrum, it could be like a seductive come here, or a loving come here, or an affectionate come here that immediately maybe even produces like oxytocin in the brain or something.
Yeah.
It's pretty amazing when you view kind of human connectedness and interpersonal relationships through a lens like that.
And how important people's reactions are to us. There's those famous studies, I forget what they're called, but basically it'll be an infant and a mother, and babies at very early ages will try to get their mom to smile. And I forget what these studies are called. If you need to search it on the search engine now. And they'll try to do things and see the mom smile. And if the mom just keeps a straight face, the baby will try. These are young infants, just months old, will try and try and try. And if the mother keeps the straight face, the baby will just burst into tears and get agitated and cry. And it just goes to show how important we are to each other, how important even not just our words, but even just the body language of another person is to us.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. So one of the things you've talked about is symptoms, and symptoms in the context of the cure for a particular disease or health struggle. I think this is a really fascinating thing. So explain what you mean by this.
Yeah, so when I first became kind of aware of this concept, from a good friend of mine named Dr. Charlie Croftley, who is what we consider an elder in naturopathic medicine. I don't know if you know him. If you don't, I should introduce
you. Say it again, Charlie what?
Charlie Croftley. He's an ND. He's in Colorado, And he is 72 years old and easily looks 20 years younger. He is an amazing, and so he's in what we call an elder, who's really passed down some of the hardcore, like naturopathic, like the naturey naturopathic ideas. And one of the examples he gave me is, for instance, think of a hangover. People would say to him, "Hey, Dr. Copley, what's the cure for a hangover?" And he's like, "Well, the hangover is the cure." And they'd be like, "What do you mean?" "Well, it's like the headache is your vasculature, expanding to try to bring these toxins through your body faster. So it's a change in metabolism. The sweating, you can like smell the alcohol through the sweat, is your body's metabolism working extra hard to detoxify, that. There's a raise in body temperature with a hangover, which is another way that your body is trying to kind of flush things out. And what happens if you were to like continually suppress those, or if you drink too much to where a hangover isn't enough, and you suddenly have, different disease states. So those symptoms are actually part of your body's, attempt to cure the situation. And there are a lot of examples of this actually in naturopathic medicine. This one doctor, Dr. Paul Herskew, who's a really well-known naturopathic doctor, he had a patient that had psoriatic arthritis. And she would also get lung infections like pneumonia a few times a year. So he would treat her, with herbs and homeopathy, whatever he used. I don't know exactly what the treatment was. And then he'd treat her for the pneumonia. And there's this idea in naturopathy that when you suppress a symptom, or you don't let the symptom really, when you don't kind of help move the symptom through, that it gets deeper into what's called the lesional level of disease, when things really start happening in the tissues. And so what he said to this patient is, we're not going to treat the pneumonia. You're going to like fast, and you're going to get yourself through this process and let your body heal naturally. And when she did that, the psoriatic arthritis never returned. So there is this, unseen connection between the skin, which is a munctory organ, right? It's an organ of emunction and detoxification, and your lungs, which also are. And it was by constantly kind of suppressing some of the symptoms of her recurring upper respiratory infection that didn't allow her skin eruptions, or what they call skin eruptions, the psoriatic arthritis, to heal. So the ways that the body are interconnected are still in many ways unknown to us. Yeah. And that's why, hydrotherapy, cold plunges, sweat baths, letting a fever take its course are kind of important. I mean, of course you want to manage that, but oftentimes it is the diarrhea. It is, the sore throat is actually, the pathogen and the dysfunction in the terrain, expressing itself. And the inflammation is there to put things back into balance. And yeah, we want to keep that from going overboard, whatever. But I just think that it's something that was once known in medicine, like a couple hundred years ago, and we've kind of lost. Functional medicine and functional nutrition and naturopathic medicine are kind of helping bring that to light. But I just think it's something for people to get more aware of their body, of what a symptom really is, and how, depending on what it is, like you don't want to always stop up the diarrhea. Now, of course, you don't want to get totally dehydrated and sick and have like cardiac event because you have no electrolytes in your body. But as a rule, there are many people walking around this world, they're so disconnected from their symptoms, they're just doing whatever they can to just shut them up.
Yeah. My older brother's a chiropractor, and deals with a lot of people with chronic pain. And he's developed a whole system over, being in practice for more than a decade, and then prior to even being in practice, studying biomechanics and physiology and corrective exercise for another decade prior to that. He deals with a lot of people with chronic pain, and almost invariably people come in with chronic pain, and their goal is, can you eliminate my pain? And a big part of what he does is to re-educate people that our goal is not, that pain is not the problem itself. Pain is your body's signal to you that something is wrong and needs to be fixed. And so the goal isn't just, let's cover up your pain and get rid of the pain and chase after the pain. If that was the goal, then, you know, what conventional medicine is doing, which is giving painkillers and opioids, which creates a whole mess of other problems.
Injection.
Yeah, and gut problems and opioid addiction and a giant epidemic of a mess that's been created with their approach to pain, which
my sister died.
Science, by the way. But you know, my brother spends a lot of time re-educating people. Let's pay attention to pain, not as the thing to be fixed, but as the signal that is telling us how to fix this and how to address the actual root causes of this pain. And, you know, so 100%. And I mean, he gets incredible results with people through, but a lot of people in practice who are physical therapists or chiropractors actually end up getting sucked into the frame of the patient or the client and get sucked into a game of let's chase after your chronic pain and do whatever we can to get rid of the symptom. And I think in that context, as in the context that you gave, it's so important to understand the symptom as a signal of something needing to be fixed rather than the entire problem itself, and you know, the goal just to get rid of the symptoms.
Yeah, and how wonderful that your brother is that self-aware of a clinician. And if we can bring that self-awareness back into all of us, even with starting with simple little practices that we talked about that might just seem, you know, what is remembering, you know, what is noticing when I'm thirsty have to do with anything. But when you start to become aware of the kind of basic things that you're not paying attention to, it just kind of builds, just like any kind of exercise builds strength.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Is there anything that you want to leave people with? You know, we've covered a lot of ground here, from love is medicine to self-awareness techniques to placebo and nocebo effect to the role of hope, symptoms as part of the cure. What would you like to, if you kind of have one final thought that you want to leave people with, what would that be?
I would say that I guess the place I'd really like to leave people is with the concept of really, we touched on this, but really being honest with yourself. There's so many instances, so many cases I've seen where people just look away from their own signals of their body, or look away from their own, the way they move through the world, as if, like, you know how a child, we're both parents, how a child up until a certain age, if they go like this, they think you can't see them, right? Maybe like a 2-year-old will go like this and they think you can't see them. I think people aren't honest with themselves, and they feel like if they're not honest with themselves, then somehow they can hide the fact that they're running their life towards disease. And so I would leave people with, you know, one of the best ways to really love yourself and the people around you is to be honest with yourself. Be honest with the choices you're making in every moment, not to be judgmental or harsh, but when you're really honest and you're faced with a certain emotion that's uncomfortable, just like a fever or diarrhea, what is that signal? What is that message to you? And it sounds scary, like if somebody's like realizes, oh my gosh, if I'm honest with myself, I'll have to deal with this smoking, or that I take pain pills, or that I speak unkindly to my child or something like that. But when you come back to that honesty, then like you can only, you know, it's just like shining a light on something, and then you can bring it into a state of health.
Mm-hmm. Beautiful. On a final note, I want to mention to everybody listening that they need to tune in to the Love is Medicine documentary. I'm going to be sending out an email for it.
Thank you, Ari.
Razi, what are the details of when this comes out so people can have probably release this podcast like right?
Oh, thank you.
Just before the documentary comes out.
I appreciate that. And you can definitely see Ari there and the Love is Medicine project, but it begins online September 16th, 2019, and it's 1 week. It's 7 episodes over 7 days. And I think it'll really inspire people with hope, more greater self-awareness. It's a little bit different in that it's not like some docuseries that are like, okay, this is what you do for your gut health. It goes deeper into some of the things that we've talked about today and have talked about before. And I think that watching the Love is Medicine project will help people, who already have their favorite influencer, their favorite book, but they're not really digging into it. It'll help them to like, okay, like I've been watching all my videos in Energy Blueprint and like, why the heck, I haven't really made the changes. I think it'll inspire people to do that.
Yeah, beautiful. Razi, thank you so much for this interview. It was a blast, as always.
Ari.
And again, what are the dates for Love is Medicine?
September 16th to the 23rd. I think you'll have a link there for the loveismedicineproject.com.
Okay. Perfect.
And yeah.
Yeah, I'll have a link on the show notes page for this podcast and in the video description on YouTube for that as well. So Razi, thank you so much. Really, really enjoy this and hope to chat with you again very soon, and speedy recovery on your tailbone fracture.
Thank you, Ari. And we've got our dates for after with our new hot list to send for you. I know there was some issues. I don't know if it was our CRM or what, but we're definitely, and my team is well aware to like make that right. So I'm really happy to support your work because I really love it.
Yeah, thank you so much. I appreciate that.
Yeah.
All right, Razi, have a wonderful rest of your day. Thanks again. Talk to you soon.
Congratulations on your growing family.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate it. Have a good one. Bye. Hey there, this is Ari again. One more quick thing before you go. Just make sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel, The Energy Blueprint, and also make sure to subscribe to this podcast on your favorite podcast platform, whether that's iTunes or Stitcher or anything else. I hope you guys enjoyed this interview, and I will see you again next week.